Welcome back to the Lanterne Rouge Cycling Podcast weekly show. It's been a minute. We had maybe not a holiday, a bit of a break before the Tour de France season kicks off. A lot of racing to get into. Tour de Suisse, men and women, Copenhagen, men and women. A lot of Belgian ChatGPT races. The inaugural Andorra Clàssica, as well as a very entertaining Giro under 23, perhaps the most exciting stage race of the last week, I would say, as well as a lot of news. A big bombshell from the UCI on some rule changes all bundled into one press release. Deviation police, we further get our pension perhaps with some additional rule changes, and I think the most interesting discussion of today, the Dries de Bondt and Ken Vanmarcke investigation opened by the UCI Ethics Commission. So a lot to get into, probably our last weekly before the Tour de France preview in a week or so. How are you, Benji? What have you been up to?
Pretty good, actually. It's been a heat wave in the UK, so it's blustered, but there's been a lot of racing this week. A lot of racing left and right, 3-4 races on the same day to track, and it's actually been enjoyable because, yes, we've enjoyed the spectacle of the big guns against each other at the Dauphiné, the likes of Pogacar versus Vingegaard versus Remco, but in this week of racing, it was more what's Almeida going to do at the Tour de Suisse? What are the other riders going to do? The sprinters come back into action. We see Melier Philipsen and so forth sprinting at Baloise Belgium Tour. Copenhagen Sprint. First time we see that race. Is it going to be fun or not? Let's find out. So many small races that actually I was into it this week. You?
Yeah, it was a lot to keep on top of, especially as there was, I couldn't figure out there's this race, that race. There's riders literally abandoning one race because they don't want to do the final stage to do another race and flying there and getting an exemption. It was like a lot of racing on. And then this week coming up, there's no racing on. It's National Championships time. But we'll start indeed with Tour de Suisse. They had, so after the Gino Maida death a few years ago, they then went only mountaintop finishes last year with almost no descents. This year, they went almost no mountain stages and had one long climb, which was like 9K, 7% before a long pedaling descent to the line, and then like short puncher / medium mountain finishes, like 8 to 15 minute climbs before a mountain TT on the final day. First day, really bad weather. Almeida, heavy favorite. Like everyone was basically saying he cannot lose this race. He's already won Rome. He already won Pays Vasco. He was good in Swiss last year. Beat everybody but his teammate. And the first stage was a bit of a disaster class, Benji. What happened?
Well, basically, we had a large breakaway form early on in the stage. We had rumors of Almeida potentially crashing early on in the stage, but didn't seem like that had too many consequences. Jan Christen definitely crashed in the early phases of that stage, so a rider that is on the UAE team. But Grosschartner was in the large breakaway up the road. That's a teammate of Almeida, and we saw no real established effort by UAE to go all out to catch that breakaway. And at the end of the stage, that large breakaway, including riders like Gregoire, Vauquelin, Ben O'Connor, takes lots of time on Almeida. And I'm talking, in the case of Gregoire and Vauquelin, we're talking roughly 3 minutes. 3 minutes is a lot of time in GC for a 1 week race for people that can climb and can potentially do okay at a mountain time trial. So UAE certainly started this race by making this race as hard as possible for Mr. Joao Almeida to win. But before we continue onwards, there was this interview by Mikel Bierl in the early phases of this race where he kind of dissed at Jan Christen a little bit, where he kind of said, it's great to see that Christen has such great legs, but I wish he used it for the team. I'm re-quoting it. It's not the exact words he said, but that's what it came down to. How much do we judge Christen on that versus that's the way UAE approaches 1 week races in terms of leadership these days? Because Jan Christen is not on a relatively high salary for a young rider just because he's the domestique for the team, eh? He's also one of the riders they see as a future prodigy for their team.
Yeah, but on the other hand, if you got a contract on good money until 2030, you don't need to be worried about this result or that result today if there's a rider you should work for to win the stage today. So it works both ways. If you got to get a contract next year, then you got to go right for yourself to get a top 10. But yeah, Christian crashed first stage. I mean, good on him for continuing. He was then sixth on stage 3, but then he was progressively worse. Maybe the injuries took their toll. He did kind of randomly attack every day. I wouldn't say he does come to the front of my mind as a team player. That being said, sort of who was here? I guess Bjerg was working for Almeida in this race and did a good job. So, but what if, again, Benji, what if the directors told Christian before Tour de Suisse, it's your home race, you got a free roll?
Exactly. We don't know that. And that being said, I still lean towards your answer, though. At the end of the day, Almeida is the clear leader here at the team. And on paper, he should be the one that the rest of the team works for. And it's only because it's UAE that we are coming upon this problem for the 17th time in the last couple of years. Nonetheless, from that point onwards, from that stage 1, we gradually see the return of Joao Almeida, as in stage by stage, I'm back. And of course, the big mountain stage in this race, that was the one where a large amount of time was taken. That is stage 4 with the, what's it called? The Splugenpass? Is that correct?
Yeah, I think it was the Splugenpass. It doesn't look that hard, but it's at high altitude, over 2,000 meters. And Almeida once again went solo on a descent like he did in Basque Country on a stage.
Yeah.
Takes 40 seconds back, plus Boney's only second. I think he came back on the descent. Then the next day was a punchy stage, and Only actually had Almeida drop for a fair while on the Castaneda finish. And then Almeida came back to him. This was a longer climb, maybe like nearly 6Ks at 9.5%. And Only actually relayed with Almeida, launched his sprint early, but was able to beat him. He take Almeida with Boney's, takes another minute more or less on Vauquelin. So Vauquelin just kept bleeding time. Alaphilippe was looking good, but sort of overextended. And then there was a sprint for Jordi Meus one. We'll get back to Jordi Meus in a second. And then on stage 7, it was a similar finish, sort of 2 steep climbs separated by a very short valley and 4Ks 8%. And there actually Vauquelin launched too early, Only closed him down, and Almeida was a bit calmer under pressure, and he was having to do a lot of the work. Like Almeida didn't have a mountain domestique apart from Mikkel Bjerg on the first rep of that to set a pace. He didn't have people to launch him. He's not a guy. There weren't long mountain passes apart from Splugen Pass. He's not a guy that's explosive to get separation. He had to balance taking time where he could on Vauquelin and Co, and also trying to win stages, and he managed to do both a good amount of the time.
Because let's be honest about it, if we look at the Splugenpass, especially that big mountain stage, one big mountain in the middle of the stage and then the descent to the finish, on that climb we see Almeida kind of isolated with 13, 14, 15 riders still in the group, and Christian comes back a few times to try and give him some kind of lead out to try and pin it out a little bit before Almeida can try and hammer it. But Almeida hammering it, Almeida does not have that super acceleration to attack people in a group either. It's kind of it's interesting. It's a train effect of like ramping it up and hoping that he can drop everybody towards the top of the Splugenpass. And that's exactly what ended up happening on that climb. But if we take a look at, okay, he had to approach every single one of these climbs as a one-man army kind of, with limited support from his team, I would say, then what level do we see this performance at? Because before this race, I was pretty vocal about Almeida's going to podium the Tour de France. I'm not as confident in that take after watching Tour de Suisse.
Yeah, it's tough to know, because if it was a TT on these climbs, he would have gone a lot faster. He obviously was conscious of guys on his wheel.
Yeah.
And as I said, he's not a guy that can do a 30-second big explosive attack out of the saddle and get guys off the wheel to then settle into his pace. And he had no guy to set a pace. That's going to make his watts look worse. But I agree, Benji, he also didn't look, apart from this mountain TT, that good either. Like, this is, all due respect, Kevin Vauquelin and Oscar Only. This isn't the guys in the Dauphiné. And so I think he just looks the same. I think Almeida is just the same as last year, which was, by the way, a really, really, really good rider who could have won. Like Tour de Suisse last year, they had like a 30-minute watt per kilo test after a 40K stage.
Yeah.
So of course they did big watts on Villars-sur-Olon last year.
I don't know about whether he's the same rider as last year. I feel like stage 1 counters my point here, but he's been able to survive chaotic stages more this year. Stage 1 is, again, not exactly the proof of that. But the fact that he's winning 1 week races
In Paris
is a difference compared to last year. Because last year, he wasn't in victory mode in any of these 1 week races. And now he's winning multiple throughout the year. So whether it's consistency, whether it's avoiding a little bit more the trouble, I agree. Paris, also an example of that. But for the Tour de France, it's different, because I feel like the Tour de France is taken on more structured because it's the big teams that control the stage and define how those stages will happen. One of those teams is indeed UAE Team Emirates, his team. And does the fact that he rides in the shadow of Pogacar at the UAE at the Tour de France, do you think that helps him?
It depends. It depends if Pogacar is winning really, really easily and Almeida can always sit in the group 2 in the wheels behind and then do the last K full gas like he did in Paris. That's really, really good and helpful for him. If it's close and Adam Yates is not so good and he has to do some death pulls here and there, it becomes a lot more complicated for Almeida. Yeah. So it really depends. It can be good. I mean, last year he did Paris where, again, he started well, I think, and started okay, and then he got sick or just he's not good in Paris. This year the same. He got sick or he not good in the hectic. Then he did Catalonia with Pogacar, who was the boss there. And he had to pull. Then in Tour de Suisse, he should have won, but Yates won. To me, he just has a different schedule this year where he goes to Valencia 2nd, Algarve 2nd, Paris 6th. It was more or less the same level. Basque, clear leader, wins. Romandy, clear leader. Vine also worked for him, wins. And then Swiss, he wins. So with no Adam Yates, I'm not sure the level is that different. His descending looks a lot better to me. In Pays Vasco, that descent he did was very, very, very good and aggressive. So I think maybe positioning in hectic, I'm not sure, but general descending, aggressiveness, riding finishes. I mean, look how many, he's won 9 World Tour races this year, Benji. I think that's more your point, right? Like, whatever you want to say about scheduling, strength of competition, 9 World Tour races, 3 World Tour 1 weeks. It's the most of anybody in cycling this year.
Actually pretty crazy if you think about it. Nonetheless, to bring it back to Tour de Suisse, as we hinted at, Almeida ends up winning the Tour de Suisse. He does that also on the final day, winning the mountain time trial pretty impressively today, actually. Philly's Gulls time was impressive in that mountain time trial. And then Almeida across the line, I was like, okay, that's all right. That's already quite a bit faster. Kevin Vocalano, do you want to talk about him? Valiant race. Obviously gained a lot of time on stage 1, but the fact that he was able to hold on to Gull and only for multiple of these mountain stages, maybe especially mountain stages. You know what I mean. Hilly/medium mountain stages. Impressive by Vocalin. Does this mean he's going to top 5 the Tour de France? No, but this means that Vocalin is a rider that can win a Tour de France stage next month, right?
Yeah, definitely. There's some punches. I remember last year we were like, okay, UAE and Visma are going to take these first 2 stages. They both went to the breakaways. So let's not assume, I mean, what if Alpecin aren't strong enough to control the brakes in week 1? I mean, we'll do the Tour de France preview, but I think a few of those first week stages look good for Vocalin, Puncher, and I don't think all of them are going to be controlled easily, especially if the Pedersens and Binnies and Intermarchés decide, they're actually a bit too hard.
Bettiol's going to try and win them from the peloton.
Oh, okay.
Remember? Was that also
that's
not the
right?
Vocalin
EF
stage?
rode on stage 1 last year, so Bettiol could win the sprint against Van Aert. That was crazy. Yeah. Otherwise, from Swiss, I just think Oscar Onley looks really good. Like, he's just a really, really good rider. He just has been consistent in 1 week races. He's going to obviously have a tilt at the Tour de France GC, and also the first week I would say suits Onley and how punchy he is. Alaphilippe, Benji, I actually think Alaphilippe can win a week 1 stage.
Ooh, I'm liking this.
But mentally he's getting worse and worse, I think.
I don't know what you mean by mentally he's getting worse, as in he spends too much energy, or...
Like, he was always way too nervous in finals in the first place, but he was just so much better than everybody. He could just punch away from them. And I think now it's getting maybe where his level is kind of the same. or not as good, and he's got to ride it a bit smarter, I think then it's tricky for him in those. Like, I just think if it's a group of 5, he's not going to win the sprint because Poggy will be cooler or something.
But the fact that he was fighting for the stage when he was in the group on stage 7, for example, I loved seeing that. I love seeing myself a bit of Julien Alaphilippe panache, and I hope we can see that both in week 1, but also in breakaways throughout the race. Maybe in week 1, I don't necessarily believe he can compete against the likes of Mathieu van der Poel and so forth, but I'm hoping that we see something from Alaphilippe in the first week of the Tour de France. But outside of what we've discussed, I don't have too much to say about Tour de Suisse. Jordi Meeuw's leaving this race. He DNS's. He does not start, I think, maybe stage 7 already, and then dips out, flies off to Denmark, and starts the Copenhagen sprint. To be clear, that's technically not allowed by the UCI rules, but he would have had to get an exemption for that, or do teams not care about those exemptions and just send their riders anyway, hoping that Tour de Suisse won't complain?
I think they must get an exemption, and Tour de Suisse doesn't care because he wasn't in a jersey.
Yeah.
If they care if you leave in a jersey, obviously, and he was, obviously not going to do anything in the final TT. So I think the organizer just didn't care. And then, he went to Copenhagen, and I'll do that now. He won, and it was a strange sprint, like these one-day sprints can be. 235Ks, absolutely flat. Last 60Ks in a city circuit. Breakaway with Plowright and Mads Andersen surviving from the early break. Bridge across with Cedric Berlins, Casper Pedersen on the national team, and Dan Holer being in that move made changed the race completely. Visma run out of riders. The break goes to 30 seconds. Holer's pulling all out. And I was thinking, okay, they're trying to burn the other lead outs for Pedersen. It was working. It
Smart.
was like every other lead out was having to use their guys. But then it got to the point where I was like, okay, but you don't actually want the break to win because Darnola can't win from this break with Plowright. He's too fast, and Casper Pedersen and Berlins was holding something back.
And especially to hammer your point home, there was something that happened in the last 11 kilometers of the stage, I think with about 8-9 kilometers to go, a crash in the peloton that basically split the peloton in half. In doing so, Olaf Kooi out of contention for this sprint. So a crash blocks the road, and he's not with the first part of the peloton, which means that Pedersen is now one of the faster riders in the first part of the peloton, and there's less domestiques and less teams with an absolute intrigue to catch this breakaway as fast as possible. So less teams are invested because their sprinter is not in the front group. So that adds to your point as well that Dan Holer was actually helping this breakaway win from that point onwards, but also how much time between the communication of that crash happening to Dan Holer being told that that crash has happened, to Lil Trek Diaz realizing that Pedersen might be one of the fastest people in the group now, to realizing that he might need someone like Dan Holer to position himself. I'm not sure I can blame Lil Trek too much in the situation. I enjoyed that they were trying something with Holer in the breakaway, and the gap was going down towards the last 4 kilometers anyway, like 15 seconds, 10 seconds, and
there wasn't much time.
Right.
The whole Trek team got caught behind except Pedersen. So, and you needed a lead-out rider to bring you up in this. I think Meeuws had Van Dijk, but Miles Scotson's out for Arcade position Demar. All of Trek, as I said. Schwarzman for Israel. Bahrain for Bauhaus, and Louvel's also out of there. So it really, and Tudor lost riders. So it really affected the sprint, and it was really thinned out. And in the end, Jordi Meeuws won ahead of Renard. Cofidis went for the 2 sprinters, both Anielkowski and Renard. Groenewegen launched too early, and he got rolled by Meeuws pretty easily. Janier 3rd, Demar 4th, Lund Andreessen 5th, Hugo Page 6th, Groenewegen 7th, Bauhaus 8th, Anielkowski 9th, Varenskold 10th. That was the Copenhagen sprint. Before we go back to the women's Tour de Suisse, because indeed we did have that segue because of the Jordi Meeuws winning in 2 different races, both on simultaneously. A word on Morten. Trusted by some of the fastest riders in the peloton. Some of these riders probably before this sprint would have been taking some Morten bicarb from the car with about a few hours to go, because it was such a long race, and they didn't need it at the start, but they needed it at the end. And But I've been using Morton gels actually all week in Tignes. I've been trail running, put one in my back pocket, and then I smashed one after like the main climb, and then tried to not get heat stroke. Managed to not get heat stroke this year. Great victory. I think if you all remember last year at Tignes, I got like but I was so red.
You came back as a crab last year.
I
But
looked bad.
Morton definitely helped you going this time, eh?
I don't think Morton has sunscreen, but it did have gels that kept me going and didn't bonk on those in the high heat, because their hydrogel technology, particularly when it's hot, you can have some GI issues. It can be difficult to digest food or a high amount of carbohydrates, but in the heat, the Morton gels go down easily. No mess, no syrup, no added junk. So if you want to try Morton, you can get 20% off your first order of gels or drink mixes, whatever you prefer, at using code LRMorton2025 at morton.com. That's 20% off drink mixes or gels at morton.com. Thanks to Morton for their support of the show. And you can see the link down in the show notes to try it out yourself. I would highly recommend it with summer coming up now if you're out and about doing more activities. Okay, the women's Tour de Suisse was won by Marlen Reusser. Dominant fashion, actually. She was quite aggressive. Yeah. She was just the strongest rider in the race. And this was on steep climbs too, where I would have said Demi should have been the strongest. I think this is a bit concerning for Vollering. She looked a bit empty at the end of the race. I think this might have been one race too many. I was actually surprised she was in Swiss, because she did the Ardennes and then a whole Spanish block of racing, Vuelta. Then 5 days later, Itzulia. Yeah. Then a week later, Catalunya. And then 4 days later, Swiss.
Does she live in Switzerland?
Yes.
Maybe she just wanted to race her home race. That's also a possibility. But I agree that it might have been the race too much. I'm not necessarily concerned, though. As in, Tour de France-wise, I'm not certainly going to say, oh, Marlen Reusser is now the favorite for the Tour de France Femmes. I don't see that. I did see a really strong Marlen Reusser. And I'm not concerned about Demi Vollering. I'm more asking now, what is the ceiling of Marlen Reusser? Because her climbing has improved quite a lot this year. We've seen her at a solid climbing level. No, time trial-wise, Tour de France Femmes isn't exactly going to give her much, if I recall correctly. But when it comes to the climbing itself, a Madeleine, etc., how do we see a Marlen Reusser fare on that? And if we look at the final GC, for example, how do we see her do in the final GC of the Tour de France Femmes? If we think about Marlen Reusser now, because it wouldn't shock me if she top 5s the race with this climbing.
Is she's second favorite?
Would you say that?
Yeah. What?
I'm trying to go through the teams right now.
She was second best climber in the Vuelta with steep climbs.
Better than Van der Breggen.
Yeah. And now as Swiss, she destroys them. So, yeah. She's second favorite.
It's different types of climbs. It's huge climbs, Madeleine, but I would still argue that because there's also other
Demi
stages.
and Catalunya didn't move me on. Like, the reason Demi did Catalunya, I don't think maybe they were originally planning to do it and she was supposed to have a break. Yeah. They did it because there was a 1 hour climb that they used as a simulation for the Tour de France. The problem is Bunel was then on her wheel, and then she didn't want to take away Xavi's GC podium, which I still don't know why Demi is all like so fixated on help. Anyway, so she slowed down, and then it wasn't like a good representation of what she could do on a 1 hour climb anymore.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, but that was the point of her doing the race, was for her to go full gas, I assume, on a 1 hour climb, not to help at least Xavi get second on GC. So, yeah.
That being said, it was impressive to see Marion Bunel do so well on that climb. And how do we look at the watts on this climb? If we look at the level here, they weren't that good for Vollering, but for Bunel.
Oh, yeah, they were good for her, obviously, and she followed for a long time. But I think there was a lot of cat and mouse in the group because of, the GC positions. But yeah, I think Reusser, Movistar got to be confident. They got a good team. They got Patino. Patino was solid in Catalunya. She'll be a climbing domestique for Reusser. So I think there'll be a little bit of concern, although, FDJ on paper have the strongest team. Labou, Xavi, Music, it is by far the strongest team.
Yep, that's for sure. Talking about teams, there were also teams present in the Copenhagen Sprint, the women's edition. We had well, let's be honest about it. We see one day sprint race on parkour, we think about one rider, Lorena Wiebes. Lorena Wiebes was at the start, and at the end, Lorena Wiebes wins the sprint. There were some activities in the last 15 kilometers, though. Just like in the men's race, there was a crash that blocked half of the peloton, basically. And that happened with about 11 kilometers to go in the women's race. We had Rebecca Kerner, I think her name is. I think she's Danish champion on UNOX, but I'm not completely sure about it. There were some words by Wiebes after the race about safety surrounding the circuit. I don't think this crash was actually safety related. Rebecca, it seemed to me like she turned into the corner before the corner was there. In doing so, halfway through the corner, she realizes, okay, gonna ride into the barrier. She turns right and she ends up causing the crash in that corner. I'm not blaming her for that. Plenty of riders have made mistakes like that in their careers. But to me, that's not a mistake I can attribute to the parkour. But overall, I must say, wasn't too impressed by the Copenhagen sprint races. A circuit sprint race, I agree. Big crowds, great for Danish public when it comes to sport of cycling. TV-wise, it's one of those races where you turn in with 5 kilometers to go, if I'm honest. But something about a sprint in a circuit parkour doesn't fit with me in 2025.
It honestly felt like a 5-hour version of the Villawood crit before the TDU.
That was a good race.
It's the same racing.
Villawood's better. Sorry.
Yeah, because it's the first race we see them of the year in the new kits, so we're all fired up. Yeah, it was. But then what are you going to do, Benji? It's Denmark. It's flat. Greenland's got mountains.
No. I'm not having this. There are other interesting things in Denmark. Little cobble climbs, etc.
Tour of Denmark has punchy hills and parkour.
Bin dwars door Vlaanderen. Replace it by a Danish cobble classic.
Yeah, okay. I'm sure I'm on board with that.
I don't think Flanders Classic would enjoy me hearing that, me saying that, but
they can organize it. They can organize it.
Exactly. Dwars door Denmark.
Exactly. But yeah, Wiebes won that sprint easily, and no one was really surprised. Behind her was basically everybody fighting to get her wheel, and then she just won anyway ahead of Balsamo, Consoni, Charlotte Cole, Vinhoven, Lily Williams, Andresen, Diederiksen, De Zolter, and Bertid Zolo. So yeah, a lot of UCI points up for grabs though. That's why the teams are really keen to go to these races. The other good racing was in Belgium. We had a trio of sprint classics / random technical parkour. We had Dwarsdorp, Hageland, Antwerp, Port Epic, Huis-Chapelle. What other random ones have there been?
Mate,
Brussels Cycling Classic
races. We called it that for a reason, because all these races had different names back in the day. I think the Brussels Cycling Classic was the Primus Classic back in the day. I could be wrong about that. Nonetheless, we're going to continue our narrative here.
It was Paris-Bruxelles before.
No.
Yeah.
No, that's a different race. No?
I think that's what it was.
Really? I'm shocked by that. Because I know Paris-Bruxelles existed, but
on
first
PCS,
of all, Paris-Bruxelles, how?
On PCS, that's what it was, but then it was in September, and I think they've confused I think Paris-Bruxelles might be Primus Classic.
Bro, I don't know, man.
Exactly.
This is our point.
They're all fictional.
All these names could have been invented by an AI chat GPT. Then again, I've not been a great fan of AI recently. It's gone a bit over the top in my personal opinion, but that's a topic for a different podcast. Belgian cycling races with lots of sprinting on the menu. We saw Tim Merlier in one corner, Jasper Philipsen in another corner. Before we go to the actual results, how do we see both these teams approaching these races and the Tour de France afterwards in terms of leadouts for these riders? Because I look at Merlier and it's Bert van Lerberghe. It's also going to be Bert van Lerberghe at the Tour de France, most likely, without much other support, I'm guessing, unless we see some rouleurs that will also be there for Remco, also help him there in sprint stages. But on the other hand, you've got Jasper Philipsen with Van der Poel at the Tour de France, Jonas Rickaert, who was present in some of these stages. How do you see these two sprint teams against each other outside of their sprinters?
I think Alpecin didn't look that good in the lead-outs, to be honest. They didn't really place Philipsen that well. They were clearly missing Van der Poel, clearly missing... Because when you have Ricard before Van der Poel and then you have someone like Fabio Van den Bossche placing them in the draft, because he can't hit the wind that well because he's small, but then so he can't be a last man. Exactly. He can't be a last man. But then when you have him third last, placing around 1K to go, and then Ricard can hit the wind, and then Van der Poel obviously can, then it works perfectly. But when you miss that Van der Poel Ricard piece, it's tough. And in Baloise, Ricard, it wasn't that. I didn't see him in the last stage, actually. I didn't see him in the first stage, or the second one that Philipsen won. Ricard does an unbelievable lead out. Like, he wins Philipsen that stage. He comes on the inside, goes like diagonally and moves Teutenberg, I think, off Milano's wheel, and then just creates the space for Philipsen to go into it, and then Philipsen wins. On pure like head-to-head, Merlier is way better than Philipsen in sprints right now. Yeah. He just destroyed him in the Noch Heist sprint. It's an uphill sprint. The last sprint today, he positioned himself perfectly. It's not like Bert was doing some masterclass today either, and Merlier just was way too good.
It's not just that he can sprint faster, it's also that he's better at positioning himself, like you say. Part of that is also that if you're better, then you also have more energy to play around and find the right position, etc. But when it comes to Merlier, it looks like some kind of ease at the moment to do that. I'm saying that, but in the stage that Philipsen won, he was in Narnia, and he tried to move up, and he found himself boxed in. He tried to move up differently, found himself boxed in, and eventually couldn't actually open his sprint. So 2 out of these 3 stages, Merlier dominated, basically. The other one, his positioning initially before the sprint was so bad that he couldn't get into a competitive position by the time the sprint started. So while I enjoy seeing the work of Bert van Lerberghe positioning Merlier in a competitive position, I do feel like in the Philipsen sprint, did not look that great in stage 1. Hey, Steven, the position that Merlier starts in is for 99% of the other sprinters a non-competitive position.
Yeah.
It's only because he's Tim Merlier that he wins that stage. So I'm also not super impressed by Soudal Quickstep when it comes to positioning Merlier. The last stage was the only stage where Merlier was well positioned.
Or stage 1, they kept him fresh until 3Ks in the front, and then they all disappeared, and then he positioned himself. I think if you leave his legs fresh for the last 4 minutes, he can make it happen. But yeah, if he has to position himself and he's had to do work, it's tough for Merlier. Philipsen, I just think he just doesn't look as sharp as last year, Benji. Even Dwars Het Hageland, he was sitting on, I know it's a random gravel race, but Manier was just way better than him. Manier was doing 5 times the work and just destroyed him. And also in Broe, in the sprint, Manier comes from Narnia, beats him in the bike throw. These are like Philipsen, he won 7 races in a row in these sort of races 2 years ago. I just think, and the results also bear it out, he's just a little bit less sharp than last year. He nearly had a big crash on stage 1. That being said, can Philipsen still win multiple Tour de France sprints this year? Absolutely. Because with that lead out, if Merlier is not in position, he can do it. But I think it's going to be harder this year. It's a better sprint field. It's got Milan Merlier there as well. They weren't there last year. So it's going to be more competitive in the sprints, and I don't think he's going to win 3 and 4 like he did in previous years.
Yeah.
But yeah, they were great races. Kielich won Antwerp Port Epic. That was an exciting race. Merlier was actually incredibly strong there. He was on his own in a group of 15, and then the quick steppers had to come back, and they couldn't catch. Kielich, who also had, I think, Valen go across him because no one wanted to pull with Merlier. And then, that's about it from... Oh, we should say Baroncini wins Baloise Belgium Tour GC. Hayter won the TT against Ghana. And then, very, very strange, but yesterday was like a hillier race. Baroncini did a good TT, gets in a breakaway. It doesn't get shut down because Quickstep couldn't. And Baroncini goes into the GC lead with a few bonus seconds, 4 seconds out of Hayter. And then today, Quickstep didn't go for the golden kilometers, which were there for all the bonies, even though Hayter's pretty fast. I know Baroncini's fast too, but still, I was really surprised.
Me too. Like on one end, breakaways ahead. It's not a 3-man group. It was like 5-6 riders. There were multiple teams pulling in the peloton. Quickstep was pulling at a certain point. I'll be honest, I didn't watch the first half of this race, so I don't know if they were pulling very hard to catch this breakaway. When I tuned in, it didn't seem like it. So I assumed that they didn't put in the effort to necessarily have this golden kilometer for the peloton, which would have potentially given them seconds for Ethan Hayter.
And there were 3 intermediate sprints before that.
Yeah, true. Do those 3 intermediate sprints also give bonus seconds up?
I think so. So the organizers, I think, will be throwing their hands up today. They'll be like, we had GC, 4 guys within 10 seconds, Baroncini, Hayter, and Ganna. 3 of the 5 strongest teams in this race, big budgets. And they didn't go for the sprints, and they let Niels van den Broeke Vlaming into the breakaway and gave him 3 minutes. Like, I think they'll be a bit annoyed.
Niels van der Putten? Was it him?
I tried to do a mixture of his name and another one.
Okay.
It didn't really work out. But yeah, Baroncini won I think the Super 8 Classic. Maybe that was the Primus Classic last year. He was very good in the Giro, actually. Came out of that well. He even sprinted to a top 10 in the final stage in Rome and now wins Baloise Belgium Tour. So he's kind of on the right track. He had a fair few years with bad injuries at Trek, where he was under 23 world champion when they stole it from Niels Eckhoff. And then he was injured at Trek. UAE signed him, and it's looking good.
Collarbone after collarbone is what I remember from Baroncini in the last couple of years. So it's good to see that ends up winning a race like Baloise Belgium Tour. It's a bit of an odd way to win this 1-week race. It's consistency over singular stage victories that led him to this point. But hey, that's how GC works. So congrats to the man. And I'm very curious what he will show in the future, whether he ends up growing from here or whether he turns into a bit of a Covey, which was a bit of a stagnation, if we're honest, over the last couple of years. Nonetheless, let's move a little bit forward now, because we had the Melier versus Philipsen. Mate, there was an Andorra Clàssica today, a 1-day mountain race in Andorra. I was looking at the parcours 2 days ago and I was like, okay, they start with Port d'Envalira, massive climb already, like 27 kilometers at 5%, if I recall correctly. Col d'Ordino from the Canillo side is included. Then we've got Baixal is in there. Botella is the finish. Botella is that basically up to Pal, or is that past Pal, or where do I see that?
Yeah, you go up to Pal, and then at the roundabout, instead of going to the ski resort left, you go right, Col de la Botella. It's a bit flatter. They didn't go all the way up to Port Cabus. Probably good idea they didn't in the end. They took out Engolasters, which is where there was a storm. Apparently, every time there's a bike race in Andorra, there's a storm in that region. You'll remember in 2019, that was where there was the heavy storm on the stage Pikachu one up to Cortals den Camp. They took that out. I think a good decision, also because the race was already super, super hard, and they took out Bechelis. Yeah, but it would have made the race already way too hard on Bechelis. Yeah. And we saw Movistar came past my house just here, which is really cool. Already Movistar was smashing with Formolo after Col d'Ordino. It started to rain at the end of Cormeia. Tom Schoens was said to Davide Formolo, please stop, calm down. Formolo was like trying to be like go over the top of the descent, and I was like, why are you doing? Enric does not want you to do that before the Tour de France. Like it's a good start list for a fresh .1 race. Pidcock, Mas, Schelmoser, good start list, but Berwick. But they don't want to crash here either. They're doing it because they live here, and it's convenient, and they're up at Picmaya maybe. And so then we get to the Col de la Botella. Schoen's pacing. Bernard launches Schelmoser. Schelmoser gets countered after he doesn't drop Mas. And then we got a new enemy, Benji. It's a big day for the pod. Nico Denz, you're freed. You're freed. Tom Schoens, you're freed. We have some new enemies. I want
to define who the enemies are, because we get into a race situation where Mas and Christian Rodriguez are relatively strong in this race off the front. Then we see in response to that, Mr. Seb Berwig, the Undertaker, comes back, gets to their wheel. We've got this 1v1v1 battles. Kelmo's a bit off the back constantly for most of this climb. And to me, it looked a lot like Enric Mas was scared of Seb Berwig and Christian Rodriguez, and therefore brain froze and Schelmoser came back.
I mean, When was the last time he won? Like, if you ask yourself, why do riders not win races that are so strong? Kelderman, Enric Mas.
Yeah.
Hasn't won in 3 years. Just watch this stage. Watch this race. Like, what? He basically... So, Schelmoser, we all know Schelmoser is pacing himself.
Yeah.
Mas was in the Vuelta last year. Schelmoser rides like Almeida on these climbs. He waits and he trusts his sprint and he just keeps them in sight. He's not cracking. They just paced all day for him. Mas starts to get in a full finesse battle, refusing to pull with Seb Berwick and Christian Rodriguez. Like, first of all, Seb's just going to ride for third because that's a good result for him, right? Rodriguez, take your chances. If Schelmoser comes back, you lose 100% of the time. 100% of the time. And so the finesse battle up front, yeah, we've got Enric Mas, Enrique. We've had a good run. I've pumped up your tires, supported you, picked you for races. You're a new enemy of me on LRCP because you finessed Berwick.
You physically pumped up his tires?
No, metaphorically. I was like, Enric is so good. Enric will win this. Enric is underrated. That's over now.
No, I thought he had a history as a Movistar mechanic for a second there, but yeah, he's an enemy of the podcast now.
You wait. Then he starts pacing when Schelmoser returned. Bro, what are you doing? And Schelmoser wins the race. Great race. It was great to see. I was like watching on TV. I was like, I've crashed there. I crashed there. I know that corner crashed there. So that was all fantastic to see. The storm came just as they finished. Boom, huge storm. And but yeah, pretty cool to watch, actually, I must say. So Schelmoser wins ahead of Christian Rodriguez, Enric third. Chavez came back fourth, Berwick fifth. Give your boy a contract if you want to climber, send him to the right races, send him with good preparation. Look, he did it in Herald Sun Tour on big climbs. He can climb with good guys if you just send him to races that actually have climbs in them.
We said this, I think, a year and a half ago at the start of 2024, because wasn't he in like a winning breakaway in the Giro d'Italia 2023, and then he didn't get a World Tour contract the year after? That made no sense to me. Like, you have to have a solid level. And Tour Alsace, but Giro is more representative of, okay, he can do it among World Tour riders, you know?
Yeah, but still, he won Alsace ahead of Frank van den Broek.
Yeah.
And then went to Hainan and came second. So, yeah, that was that Giro stage. That was where Nico Denz and Schoens became the enemy.
Mate,
yes.
I forgot to add a race to our list. We have to talk about it. We have to talk about it.
Some to EF, Tudor, Q365 for Pidcock, mate. Look, Pidcock was here. Q365. Berwick.
Yeah.
Get him in. I know I shamelessly use this platform to just promote Berwick, but he was fucking good today attacking Enric and Schelmoser. All right, I've said enough. I know. Too much.
Can we talk about the fact that ever since Paul Seixas gifted the victory... I'm not having this shit. Gifted the victory at the Tour of the Alps, the stage victory, to his teammate Nicolas Prudhomme with the words of, Nicolas Prudhomme is a bit older than me. We don't know if he's going to be able to get in situations like this to win races ever again. Well, I'm confident that I'll win races from this point onwards. Ever since that moment, Paul Seixas stepped up and said to... Well, no, Paul Seixas also stepped up, but Nicolas Prudhomme stepped up and said to everybody, I'm him. He won a Giro stage. Now he's won... What's the name of that race again?
Tour of the Alps, Giro, Route d'Occitanie.
Route d'Occitanie. On the mountain stage on Luzard... No, was it Luzard again?
Luzard.
Yeah. After Tourmalet?
Tourmalet. Davide Piganzoli. Bang. Attacks before the top of the climb. Full descent attack off the Tourmalet. Was it smart? Maybe. Maybe not. Was it very entertaining and panache riddled? Yes. Did it completely ruin Jefferson Cepeda and Christian Rodriguez race? Absolutely.
How? How did they lose 10 minutes the next
Because
climb?
on the descent, they were not so good and they were sprinting full out of every corner, out of the wheel through like 25 corners, and they got to the bottom of Luzarden, they were gassed. And then Steph Kras came back, who also was not happy on the descent, didn't pull, and then Kras paced Prudhomme the whole way back to Piganzoli, and then just got dropped, and then Prudhomme took 2 minutes. So Prudhomme was way stronger. I mean, you say late bloomer, yeah, okay, but
he's not
look
30.
when he got look when he got his first pro contract.
Yep.
2021. He got his first pro contract 4 years ago. So, this is his 5th season. It does make sense that riders have their neo-pro contract, 1, 2, 3, they progressively improve. And then they start to perform. And last year he was already better, like, I think. And yeah, in 23 he was already better. So big watts, really good performance from him. And I don't know if they'll take him to the Tour de France. He's obviously in good shape. Probably he needs a rest, I would say. Piganzoli 2nd and Steph Cross 3rd. That's all the races. Giro, Baby Giro. Jesus, a big week of racing. Too much. Baby Giro was chaotic. You can talk about the UAE stage 1 in Suisse. This was 10 times crazier. Basically, there were 5 favorites, I would say. Widar, Philipsen on Trek. Jana Widar's on Lotto. I thought he was on the world team because he's already so good. Nordhagen on Visma. Red Bull with Lorenzo Finn. And Ormsel on Bahrain already came top 5 in Slovenia. And Adria Pirikas on UAE Devo. Maybe that's 6 favorites. Good start list. Was missing Sechas, probably for the better for all of these people because he would have rinsed them.
Yeah.
But indeed, stage 1 was a TT. Schwarzbacher won on UAE. Stage 2 was sort of hilly stage. Didn't matter for GC. Won by Viven on Quickstep. First mount top finish. Nordhagen overextended attacking. Widar went with Finn and dropped him and went into the GC lead. Problem was, and he won this race last year, by the way, Widar. Next stage was, like a breakaway. Wasn't impactful for GC. Stage 5 is where it all goes belly up for Lotto for Visma. Breakaway goes with Ormsel. Visma is in it with Rex. Tuckwell on Bora. By the way, Tuckwell pulled Nordhagen back on the first mountaintop finish, then dropped him and finished 4th. So he's obviously climbing well and in good shape.
Yep.
They get 2 minutes plus in this breakaway. And Ormsel and Tuckwell take 2 minutes for free. And Turconi and his Bardiani lad, who, by the way, they've signed on a 4-year pro contract. And he basically top 10s every single U23 race. Filippo Turconi. Madness. And the issue was, Benji, it was like everyone was looking at Trek and Lotto. Widar's like, I don't have any teammates and I'm 55 kilos. So yes, it's my problem, but what do you want me to do?
It's not just their problem. I was also confused by the fact that Visma was okay with having a rider up front and then not riding at the back for Nordhagen. That also made no sense to me. So also, Lotto didn't have many teammates there, but in general, I also don't feel like they took that stain on perfectly either. So I don't know. I don't.
At least they dropped their guy back.
They did. That is true. That is very true. But it brings GC in an interesting position here because Luke Tuckwell from that breakaway enters the Maglia Rosa with 26 seconds on Jakob Ommerzel. Both can climb well. Turconi in third on 36 seconds. Then a minute 23 behind the GC lead is Widar after this stage. Finn on a minute 30. Pirikas on a minute 53. Nordhagen already on a minute 57. And yes, there's still mountains to come. We've got Prato, Nevoso, and so forth coming, but it's not that easy to get all of that back. And we get to stage 6 then, which, to be honest, was kind of just a breakaway stage that didn't have massive impact on the
first Italian
finish.
win in like 2 years, by the way.
Since who was it again? Since we know him, the Italian guy that won 2 years ago. I don't know, don't remember. We don't have Luke today. Luke's not in the chat, so it's Miss Rouge that's in the chat. I'm not particularly sure Miss Rouge watched Giro Next Gen 2023 2 years ago, so can't blame her. But Filippo Agostino,
Alessandro Romelli on Astana. I would never have guessed that.
That is very true. Very true. Next stage was the mountain stage up to Prato Nevoso, and the guy that won the stage, Pavel Novak, was in the breakaway, right?
He bridged across to the breakaway himself, had a teammate in there, bridged like a 2-minute gap, and then he lost only 40 seconds on like a half an hour climb to the GC group now. They were attacking, start attacking, but still, that was a mega performance from Pavel Novak. He was good in Tour de Hungary. He's the only guy in this top 10 not on not on a feeder team to a World Tour team, or indeed Turconi is on Bardiani, which is a professional team. So he's on MBH Bank Balan, that was formerly Colpack, that has had
Baroncini.
Almeida, Baroncini, Ayuso, I think Gegenhardt maybe, or maybe that was Hagens. I think that was Hagens.
That was Hagens, Almeida, and so forth. Baroncini was definitely on this team.
Yeah, good team. And massive performance from him. He went into third on GC. And so the next day, coming in, it was Pinarolo 2, like Rampas actually, finishes or climbs. Tuckwell had to defend 11 seconds to Omzel, who's climbing better than him. Novak, 27 seconds. Turconi, 52. Nordhagen, 123. Philipsen's fallen out of GC. Finn's kind of losing time every day. Perikas probably doesn't have the punch. And Visma go for it on the stage. Nordhagen does help Omzel in cracking Tuckwell on the final Rampas. Omzel then has to shoulder all of the work to the finish, obviously, because he's riding for his own GC. Nordhagen wins the stage in a sprint. Omzel second, 17 seconds ahead of Novak and Tuckwell. And Omzel takes GC by just 12 seconds. Novak defends his third on 35 seconds from Nordhagen. Really, really exciting last stage. I think a lot of talented guys here. And I think the biggest revelation isn't Omzel. It's not Omzel, it's not Novak. Yeah. They already did something in pro races. Even Turconi, to be honest, he's been good all year, and he's already got a 4-year pro contract for a reason. They know what they got. The biggest revelation to me is Tuckwell.
Yep.
I mean, like he was supposed to be a mountain domestique for Finn here.
He was already on a feeder team, so they know his talent at Red Bull Hansgrohe, but that doesn't change the fact that he stepped up from what I expected from him in this race. And it's not just the climbing, it's the overall race itself, and the race sense felt pretty good to me when it comes to Luke Tuckwell. So also, is he not Australian? So is that part of the reason that you're hyping him up?
Of course. The thing is, he doesn't need my help. He doesn't need my help anymore.
That's true.
He's on Red Bull Rookies, and he just came second in the Baby Giro. I think he'll be all right.
I think he'll be all right as well. The fun thing about discussing this Giro Next Gen is that these are the riders of the future. In the past, we've had a few Giro U23s where, who was it? Camilo Andres Camila, whatever, that rider that went to U20 UAE, I think, at a certain point. That didn't really end up going that well. We've had a few winners of this race that didn't end up becoming the prodigies that they were foretold to be. But if you look at this top 10 of the Giro U23, I promise you, in 3-4 years' time, multiple of these riders will be in World Tour. The majority of these riders will be in World Tour. And in 5 to 7 years' time, these riders will be stars on your TV screen. Not every single one of them. Maybe it's only one. Maybe it's only two. Maybe it's 3-4 of them. But that's the fascinating part about following the journey of these youngsters towards potentially becoming the top-level pros of the future. And I'm certain some of these riders will do so. How do we, for the people that don't follow the U23 circuit, Patrick, how do we view the top-level races in that U23 circuit? And are there bigger races than the Giro U23, for example?
Yeah, Tour de l'Avenir, of course, is bigger, but it really depends on the start list. It can vary year to year. If guys don't turn up to a particular race for whatever reason, even if it has a prestigious name, that doesn't mean it's better. So Flèche Ardennaise this year, big race because you got Widar and Finn there plus others. Paris-Roubaix had Albert Philipsen and Soderfist there. Bastogne-Liège had all the big guns there pretty much, I think. And this Baby Giro had every U23 GC rider, apart from Del Toro or whatever. It had every U23 GC rider apart from Seychelles. And Widar crashed out. He was looking like he was fading a bit to me before the crash anyway, kind of like last year to L'Avenir. But it doesn't help that Visma have a stronger team, so he gets lent on more. I think.
Are we disappointed in
were good.
Philipsen a little bit.
Yeah, Philipsen. It's kind of weird, no?
Yeah, I would expect more of him in a race like this, especially because it's a U23 level race, and we've seen him perform in World Tour races, which, in my opinion, a rider that has performed X amount in World Tour races shouldn't automatically be able to ride U23 races anymore. But then again, the results proves that that might not automatically mean that Albert Philipsen might be able to clean Giro next year, because that didn't happen at all. He was not on the forefront for the majority of the stages. Yes, he played a role in some of them, but a bit disappointing.
I think saying, oh, he has to win GC, maybe not. But
yeah.
Tour Down Under, for example, he's 4th on the hardest stage, and he could have won that actually with the lead out. Like, he could have podiumed it at least. That had a hard climb, steep too. And then he's 6th in Frankfurt. That's a reasonably hard race. 25th in Strada. That to me is more like, okay, maybe he doesn't win GC, but on one of these hill stages, Benji, he should just be able to like almost ride away from everybody, or at least in a group of 10, dominate the sprint.
Or because he's now part of a World Tour team, this is not a race that he focuses on at all, and he's going for other races instead. Is he going to the Vuelta already at the age of 18? I don't think so. So I don't necessarily agree with my point either in that sense, you know? I don't see that. It's still an important race for him.
The young guys doing Baby Giro are really motivated to do it. Like, Vidar was crying. He won this last year. When he abandoned, he was crying. Like, they really want to perform against their peers in the Baby Giro. It's the second biggest stage race after Tour de l'Avenir. So we'll see.
Hey,
yeah.
Not washed.
Not washed, indeed. They're all 18 years old. Like, they have... One race doesn't matter. It really doesn't. But we'll see in Tour de l'Avenir, indeed. I think the break did kind of change it.
Yeah.
But Ormsel does look really, really good. So does Novak in particular. Okay, that was all the racing. That was a lot of racing to cover. It's been pretty busy. We'll get quickly through some news. Some of it quicker than others. Some of the news, yeah. Like, Critérium de Dauphiné is going to be renamed. It's now going to be called the Tour Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes. I don't have an opinion on it. That's just news. Benji also didn't interject, so I think he doesn't have a strong view on it either. UCI is updating the deviation rule. I'm going to credit ourselves. Pat yourself on the back, Benji. Pat yourself on the back. Thank you. Thank you. This is us. It might not be, but let's say it is. New rule. Riders shall be strictly forbidden to deviate from the lane they selected when launching into the sprint, and in so doing, obstructing or endangering others. It previously was just endangering, now it's also obstructing.
Meh. I'm going to interject.
Oh no.
I will interject for the reason that this is the rule in the rule book that initially said the same exact sentence without the obstructing part of it. But there's also another segment of the rule book that defines the punishment of this specific rule, and that already said obstructing. So their own rule book already mentioned obstructing before this rule was changed in the first place. So technically, it should have already been obstructing and endangering others in the first place, how it was applied. So their rulebook was just inconsistent. They've just made it consistent now, which, sure, great stuff. But I also don't necessarily want to applaud the UCI for what seems to me like, I'm sorry, but this is minimal work that they're doing here. They're doing the bare minimum here. Like, we still don't know the perfect, correct interpretation of endangering others, obstructing others, and neither do UCI commissaires based on the decision we see on screen. Because right now, we're never going to have perfectly consistent UCI commissaire decisions. But when I look at the UCI commissaire decisions, I see riders getting away with a lot worse things in one race, and then with barely doing anything, they get penalized in other races. And it's starting to get really difficult for me to justify, okay, that rider should have been punished when another rider didn't. And for riders, it's also very difficult to know where the line is when they see other riders getting away with the one thing they get punished for. So it is the whole concept that we've been through for a lot of years now, that doesn't go away because they added obstructing to this rule. And that brings me to the point, in case you didn't know, most of the UCI commissaires at races that referee the races, that give out the fines, that decide on deviations, etc., are volunteers. gotta put that in your head, are volunteers. I'm sorry, but the sport will never have consistent refereeing. If even at the higher level races sometimes, most of the time, I'm pretty sure, based on what I heard from riders in those races, if those are not fully educated, paid for UCI commissaires that have been bred for that role, then you will never have a perfectly similar interpretation across all the UCI commissaires of situations.
Yeah, whether you're paying them or not, it depends on the training, I guess. But you do see like the director, the commissaire that went and relegated Rui Oliveira, obviously much stricter than some other commissaires. By the letter of the law, he thought there was he could do it, and to be honest, like by the letter of the rules, it kind of is.
But
it was right to relegate, but in terms of the context of what else gets a relegation, it was very, very harsh. So I also realize that we are not too. So you're just saying they're just harmonizing this rule with what the rule already said in the punishments.
In my opinion, yes. They basically just added obstructing, which it already said in a different part of the rule book. So they just made it consistent. So now they can consistently apply it accordingly, which they already should have done before. But my other problem is also, what is the interpretation of obstructing? Because let's say we saw a race the other day. I don't know which one of the Belgian ChatGPT races it was, but there was a rider of Unibet Titema Rockets that has to move left to avoid a lead out by Alpecin that falls through. Was the stage winner of Philipsen. Ricard drops through the peloton. Unibet Titema rider has to move left to avoid it. In doing so, a Lotto rider has to go left to avoid Unibet Titema rider. And Ethan Vernon comes around on the left side, doesn't react in time, and he crashes because the Lotto and Unibet Titema riders move left. That Titema rider ends up getting a penalty by the UCI commissaire, but is that a situation? Yes. Is that a situation in which that rider should be penalized? I can't put my hand in the fire for that. I say no. For me, that's a race incident.
Yeah, I didn't see that one. I mean, there was a bad crash today in Baloise, the Belgium tour. I mean, Oscar Riesebeck, I hope he's okay, but he just tried to come up the footpath again. He then realizes the footpath is ending. He tries to Massiuk the whole peloton. Connor Swift is like, no, puts his elbow out to stop.
Rightfully.
Riesebeck just chopping the whole peloton at 60 km an hour, and then Riesebeck can't take the bounce and just loses control and crashes. And I think he might have got a yellow card earlier already, but like,
would have been a second yellow card, but they won't give it because he crashed. Like, I hope Riesebeck is okay. This was kind of a situation of fuck around, find out. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it kind of was that. But yeah, there's a lot going on in sprints, to be honest. That if you really look closely, it is true. Like, if you really look closely, you can probably relegate. It's like what Thibaut Naes said. They're criminals. And that is sprinting.
Especially with the different interpretations that are possible with obstructing riders. That can be anything.
Yeah, but this is in launching the sprint, so that's when you're actually sprinting.
Well, we've seen based on other sprints that they don't necessarily apply it like that either.
Exactly.
So
yeah. Moving on to other UCI rule changes. So there was a huge drop in this press release last week. We'll have it in the show notes, and there's changes to a lot of different things. The 2026 calendar, the dates have been released. TDU is the only one, I think, with a to be determined date, but it'll be in January. Yeah. Brugge de Panne becomes the Great Sprint Classic.
It changed.
Take that, Copenhagen. And it's changing location too?
I think it's finishing in Brugge instead of the Panne now, but I'm not 100% sure.
Okay. I think I heard that too.
To avoid the Panne. That would be a good thing.
Yeah.
Also, the women's Giro d'Italia, the Giro d'Italia women is moving from the thing we criticized, the fact that it was coming together with dates of the Tour de France. It's now moving earlier in the year. So that is just starting at the second last day of the men's Giro, the women's Giro starts, which it still interacts with a Grand Tour, which is far from perfect. But I'd rather have it happen in the last 2 days of the Giro than the start of the Tour de France, you know?
Yeah, I mean, the women's Giro gets the least coverage of almost any women's World Tour race on the calendar because you're competing with the biggest show in cycling. It's not possible. And so RCS has taken over the race. It had to be changed. This is a good calendar slot. I'm very happy this is happening because, now we'll cover the Women's Giro. Now we'll cover it. We'll just do it like we did with the Women's Tour de France. We'll just keep going for an extra week.
How does it combine with the Spanish Classics? I don't know the 2026 calendar in my head, but the Spanish 1 week races now in women's cycling?
Earlier in May. They're earlier.
Okay.
The Vuelta's in early May. I don't know if it clashes with the Dauphiné. I think it might for 1 day, but that's okay. That's okay.
The men's Dauphiné, because there's no women. Well,
men's
sorry.
Dauphiné.
Tour Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes.
Yeah. There's also changes to the UCI point system. So now races have been moved into different categories. So now the UAE Tour has more points. And just a lot of point stuff. To be honest, I just don't care whether like the .pro races now are double a .1 race, so which makes sense. So it's 250 points if you win a point pro race. It previously was 200. A point one race is 125. That remains the same. So now it's double. And then in theory, a World Tour race should be double that, 500. And then some Monuments or Grand Tours are double that again. The Tour de France or Giro, 1,000 more or less. Monuments, 800. So there's, I think, Benji, you have on the notes, there's 4 tiers of cycling: Monuments, Grand Tours, Standard World Tour, Pro Series, .1s, .2s.
Technically, in men's cycling, there's 5. In men's cycling, there's 2 brackets of World Tour races. And then we've got Pro Series Class 1, Class 2. In women's cycling, before this update, we had 4. And it's also becoming 5. So it's becoming the same in men's cycling as it is in women's cycling. What I'm going to add here is that because we have that new system, did you know that in 2024 and probably this year as well, say in 2025, the Women's Tour of Guangxi gives the same amount of UCI points as the Tour de France Femmes?
I did not know that.
And that's changing now. So now there's a category above the usual World Tour race in women's cycling that include the on-paper monuments. So there's now an unofficial monument designation for LBL, RVV, MSR, and Paris-Roubaix. So the same monuments as men's cycling, basically. Lombardia does not exist on women's cycling side yet. So they've got monuments now in women's cycling, unofficially. And the Grand Tours also give more points now than the average World Tour race in women's cycling. It's actually crazy that the women's Guangxi gave the same amount of UCI points than the Tour de France Femmes. That is ridiculous. Nonetheless, those are the changes when it comes to the point system in total, but there's also a change when it comes to wildcards. And I saw that you posted a rant about it on Twitter 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, so the Grand Tour organizers got an extra wild card, but now the UCI's fought back, and now they have implemented from 2026 onwards and a third wild card. This is probably the biggest change actually in those rules because it is a relegation year. So a third pro team, the third best pro team gets full access to the World Tour calendar, Grand Tours, Monuments, 1 weekers, 1 days, full access, discretionary as well. You can turn down the Giro like Lotto did. You can turn down a World Tour race that's too expensive. By the way, they're also the UCI. On the other hand, World Tour teams can't skip certain World Tour races next year. I think they can skip 1. And currently you could skip more than that from the newer ones.
The official rule up to the end of 2025 was that you could choose to skip the World Tour races that were brought to World Tour after, I think, 2017. Those were skippable. The ones before were mandatory. And like you say, from 2026 onwards, you can only skip 1.
So it's never been a better time to be the best ranked pro team because you can save costs. You can go to the best races to go that you want to go to. And now there's 3. So that softens the impact of relegation if you are one of the top 3 teams that are relegated, Picnic or Cofidis. But you have to, that's in the annual 2024 rankings. So if Picnic or Cofidis get relegated, then they must be in the 2024 ranking at least the third best out of the pro teams plus themselves to get access to the World Tour calendar. 2025, sorry, yeah.
You're in the wrong year, but I get the point. So now it's a top 3, which means that the 4th and the 5th team will get automatic access to the classics.
To the 1 days, I think, yeah. So there's just more teams in these races, so there'll be bigger teams, and yeah.
It's an opportunity to reduce the amount of riders per team.
Yeah. I understand the organizers want their discretionary wild card. I like the pro team wild card in the current system. I don't like that it's sort of actually preferable, although there is a risk if you're not, for 1 year you're not good, then you lose it. But
yep.
Like Q365 got the Giro invite because they got money, not on merit. And in the end, in the race, they didn't do shit. So that's the downside of the discretionary wildcards, but that's the organizer's decision. What was I going to say? Oh, yeah, my rant. Again, these categories of races make no sense when teams can ride in all of them. So I think it's like if Europa League points count for your Premier League table. Like, it's like if FA Cup points count for your Premier League. It doesn't make any sense. Like, why? The Pro Series calendar, .pro calendar, only makes sense if it was then mandatory to invite on say, you take 10 1 days, 6 stage races, they're on the .pro calendar. The organizers have to invite or extend an invitation to all of the pro teams, .pro teams, and the points from those races are what decide who gets promoted.
But how do you decide which races get pro team status? And does the choice of which races that is impact the chances of certain teams having more of a chance of taking the points? Or because of, let's say you choose 10 races, you have to make it so that it's 2 sprint opportunities, 2 mountain opportunities, 2 hill opportunities. That's not really the case in World Tour either, to be honest. So it's not like our sport has that fairness across the board in terms of rider types and terrain types.
And it's tricky because then you would just, each 3-year cycle, you would just relegate 2 of the worst World Tour teams, which is what happens in football. 2 of the worst Division 1 teams get relegated regardless of if they're...
The playoffs.
Playoffs would be sick. But yeah,
in the last 2 months of the season, the worst 2 teams and the best 2 teams need to fight it out in some fucking Hammer Series event that they resurrect or something.
Yeah. Anyway, that was the points changes. Probably not that controversial, to be honest. They just boosted some points here and there. It's maybe, it's interesting to pro teams wanting to be promoted. It makes them more likely to send good riders to certain races. The most controversial rule change was the equipment limitations. This came out of nowhere. I didn't know this was on the horizon, but apparently it was. So the UCI wants to lower speeds and increase safety. And so they want to... Fair. And so they are changing equipment regulations. So from 2026 onwards, the maximum fork width will be 115 at the front, 145 at the rear. They're making a maximum rim width in road stages of 65 millimeters. That's so that there's not a deep rim that increases speed and then is maybe vulnerable in side wind. And then they're making a minimum handlebar width of 40 centimeters from 2026 onwards, but that sounds bigger than it is. That's the minimum width between the brake levers will be 32 centimeters. So it's not impacting as many riders as one might think. It just impacts one section of their pro peloton disproportionately.
Well, there's more to that. I've been doing a bit of a deep dive, and especially because the UCI came out with another article about this specific thing, because there was so much backlash to the handlebar width that UCI came out with basically an article that said, "Oh, but Safer recommended this to us, so that's why we did it." That's what that second article felt like that they brought out, that second press communique, with some more in-depth stuff. So, first of all, initially the discussion was a lot about handlebar width being 40 centimeters. First of all, what is handlebar width? We're not actually talking about the same handlebar width that if you go to a bike store and you say, I want 38 centimeter bars, that's not the width we're talking about. Because those are usually from, if you've got handlebars, and if you look at a handlebar, you've got multiple parts to it. You've got the top of the handlebars, you've got the hoods where you can hold your brakes, basically. You've also got the drops in which you see the rider sprinting. Patrick is pulling out a bike, but he doesn't realize that the podcast listeners will have absolutely no clue what he's trying to show because there's no screen to look at in a podcast player. But in the actual drops from center to center, so the center of the cylinder that you hold, that is what usually is defined as the width of a handlebar. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the outside of the drops. No, Patrick, you're pointing at the shifters. Yes, the outside there to the other outside, that's 40 centimeters. But what is misunderstood, that's not the only minimum width that is 40 centimeters. If you look at the top of your handlebars, if you're riding on cobbles, no, Patrick, that's again the shifters. If you're holding, yes, that's correct. That top, the outside of those also needs to be 40 centimeters minimum width. And that's also a problem that people haven't really realized yet. Because while the outside of your drops, sure, you can live with that. That won't affect most of the riders. There will still be smaller riders, and especially the women's peloton that seemingly was forgotten while making this rule, that will be affected by that. But the minimum width also being affected to the top of the bars, that is a bit harsher because that's often very much narrower than the outside of the drops. And like you said, we're also talking about, on top of that, the minimum width of 32 centimeters between the brake levers. So you might have seen in the peloton when riders have handlebars that their shifters, their brakes are basically folded inwards. Technically, there's a rule that allows the riders to do that by X amount of degrees for safety purposes. But in this case, the minimum distance between both brake levers can now only be 32 centimeters, and that's also affecting more riders than the initial 40 centimeter rule. So in the women's peloton, this will affect, based on what I've seen when it comes to riders' comments towards me, DMs, or their reactions on social media, what I've heard from the CPA group lighting up in the last week. Well, I would say that half the peloton might be actually impacted by the 32 centimeter part of that rule and the 40 centimeter top outsides of that rule. And that's a lot of riders, especially because it takes me 2 seconds to see this rule and realize, okay, this needs to be a proportional rule. And then you, Patrick, might immediately think, okay, Benji, how do you make this proportional? Well, TT bars are proportional. Basically, the size of your TT bars, etc., and is dependent on the height of the rider, I think was the rule. And this was in certain ranges that you could use X amount of TT bars. You can do similar things when it comes to this, but then the difficulty is, how do you do that? Do you make it proportional to the shoulder width? How do you... Will there be a UCI commissaire at the start of a race with a little ruler that looks at your shoulder width, and then every rider can do a bit of shoulder doping by trying to put their shoulders inwards a little bit? It's also not super easy, but there has to be a much better solution than same size for all, which is ridiculous.
I mean, we're really looking at the 0.01%ers here of safety. Like, riders are set up in a way in which, generally speaking, they can control the bike. They're used to riding in that position for 1,000 hours per year. Crashes are occurring because of unsignaled and dangerous road furniture, because of rider behavior towards one another, because of unsafe parkour design, because of these things in 80%, more than 80%. I'd say if you take all the crashes and say what percentage is due to behavior or unsafe parkour design, it's got to be a 95% plus.
I do think speed matters. So it's right that they're trying to reduce speed.
The rim width one, couldn't care less.
Yeah.
It changes nothing. Like, it's good. I mean, it's good. Speed goes down and people have more stable wheels in crosswinds. So that one, great. It's an easy win. It doesn't really negatively impact anyone except maybe the bigger riders who can handle a bigger rim in crosswinds. But I think what's happened is, Benji, they've just straight up forgot women ride in professional cycling.
Yep.
And then they launched the rule, and then they're like, oh shit, there's also a women's peloton and smaller riders.
In the last week, I've spoken to multiple female cyclists about this issue. I won't name them or anything, but there were active discussions in the CPA group, which is the riders union that is leaking into this. The vibe that I got from that is that the feeling in there was, okay, maybe the initial 40 centimeters rule isn't the biggest problem. The 32 centimeters rule is a relatively big problem. And from what I heard, they were gathering a list of names of riders that would be affected by it to present to the UCI to have this adapted. But there is no way this won't be adapted, in my opinion. This has to be adapted in some sense.
Well, you say that.
It has to be.
The bike weight rule is also negatively impacts the smaller riders.
For me, that is different. For me, that's different in some sense.
Yeah, but to explain the maths, let's say you take a Marlon Reusser type around 60 kilos.
Yeah.
And let's take a Guy Riolini, Fischer Black Bunel type, ballpark 45 kilos. They both push 5 watts per kilo, 300 watts and 225 watts. Their system weight with the bike rule, I've done the wrong maths here. Let me change that. I can't count. It's 6.8, right?
Yes.
Their system weight is 66.8 kilos and 51.8 kilos.
For the people that don't know, what is a system weight?
Weight of rider plus bike. So they got the bike minimum weight of 6.8 and their weight. So then their effective system watts per kilo is way higher for the bigger rider. That means that the system of bike plus Marlon Reusser is pushing 4.5 watts per kilo, and the system of Guy Riolini, Bunel, Fischer Black is pushing 4.34 watts per kilo. And this also happens in the men's peloton.
Yeah.
The difference is the weights are proportionally different, I guess, for the climbers. So 15 kilos is 33% heavier than Fischer Black and etc. There's no GC rider 33% heavier than Vingegaard and Pidcock and the really small guys. It's a much smaller proportional difference. In classics, it makes a bigger difference maybe if you had but Pidcock in the classics, the one exception, it's unfortunate for him, but it's already this unfair stuff for these smaller female riders.
That is true. You're advocating for your smaller human community once again, but I actually agree after
and for
hearing
me and Clement Braz Alfonso.
After hearing your system watt per kilo discussion, I agree with your side, but should bike weight and also be proportional? And
kinda.
In what sense does that negatively affect the safety in echelon stages, for example, for a rider like Riolini?
I think if you're adding weights to your bike to meet the UCI weight limit, there's something wrong with the rule. If you're adding metal weights to it, which these women are.
I agree, but on the other hand, if there was no rule, they'd be riding on very light equipment that might actually hinder safety.
Yeah, exactly. So the minimum weight rule was introduced so the bike manufacturers weren't giving them 4-kilogram bikes with one carbon layer because they'll ride them. Riders will ride them. They don't care. Yeah. They do, but they got to ride for a contract or whatever. They're at the behest of. They're in a vulnerable position. I think this rule will get changed. The other rule is there's a helmet certification protocol. So they're basically they want to get.
There's barely any information about it.
Well, this is what's going to happen. They're going to try to ban TT helmets in road stages.
Yeah.
Don't care. I actually think that's probably a safety. That's fine. Because also the bike industry gets to create all the extra stuff which amateurs don't need. Just wear normal helmets. I sound like Mark Matteo. And but it is, it's a balance. Progress, innovation versus extra and unneeded stuff. So that they're going to do that, and then they're also going to try to limit TT helmets from being wackier and wackier designs.
Yeah, but when I think about helmet certification protocol, to me that shouts it should be concussion related. There should be some kind of concussion related test in there to see whether helmets have to be clear, currently there's helmets that, for example, have MIPS technology or other type of technology to improve to try and help negate the force that your brain in your head occurs while hitting it into the floor that might cause a concussion, the kind of whiplash effect of your brain. I don't know how the actual words are. I'm not a doctor, clearly, but I have done my research on this shit. There are multiple technologies for multiple bike brands that use that. There's no clear standard across all the bike brands, but I do wonder that if there is a possibility for a helmet certification protocol, that it could have some kind of value assigned as there needs to be X amount of % of force reduction during that event of crashing with your head, and then it certifies it as, okay, not concussion proof, but concussion reducing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's more... There's nowhere I read there that they're trying to make road helmets actually safer.
Yeah.
It's just they want to stop basically TT helmets being used in road stages. We have the UnoX used one. They use the old TT helmet. The POC one is used by EF and Asgren. Like Asgren Benji, he wouldn't have won that stage with the normal helmet in the Giro. Super strong, but it makes a difference. And then Visma used the Arrowhead one. Ineos had like a casque, which they had to change with the because it can't cover the ears. So the helmet manufacturers are trying to introduce these hybrid helmets. I think it's going to be really hard to... How do you regulate it? Can't you just have a separate one, market it as a road helmet, and it's a road helmet? What's a road helmet, Benji?
Well, a road helmet is a helmet that you wear on the road.
Exactly.
Now, on a serious note, there are equipment specifications when it comes to the sport of cycling, and I think there's stuff that is possible in there, but you'd have to make it very specific and kind of hold innovation back a little bit, which certain part of the sport will not be a fan of that. If it helps safety, I'm okay with it. The question now is, we see all these changes, and the initial standpoint of reducing speed to increase safety, I'm all for it. Let's be honest about it. I agree with you 100% that there's numerous other things that the UCI can do and should do to improve safety and that they not necessarily have done yet. But I also have the opinion about these specific issues that how difficult can it be to, when you release these examples of, we're going to try gear limitations, we're going to try fork width, etc., we're going to do minimum handlebar width, to back it up with data when you bring it out, which makes me think they don't have the data.
They didn't use subject headings in the press release. What do you mean data? This was one paragraph of thousands of words, and you're reading it through like, oh, new calendar, hold up, they're banning the 10 cog on the back. Hold up, Nick Fisher Black has to ride a truck next year. And it's like... There's no subject headings. It was impossible to discern what was going on.
How can you define that something is dangerous if you don't have any data backing up that it is dangerous in the first place? So we're basically applying the rule, hoping that it's safer. In doing so, restricting certain things, which in some places that will work, in other places that won't work at all. And it just annoys me so much that it feels like they have zero data. And yes, they come out in that second press communique. It's based on recommendations of Safer. I've got zero confidence in Safer. Safer has been a political battle ever since it began. How am I supposed to have confidence that they're making the right decisions for the safety of the riders if they spent the first 2 years of this organization existing fighting over who gets to run it? I don't care who runs it. I care about its effectivity.
I mean, you want to talk about safety, Benji. Look at the rules about the bottle points. So apparently the bottle points were changed. Well, there was a restriction on bottle points. You couldn't feed this year outside of
bottle points,
official
feed
bottle
zones.
points,
Jesus,
and feed zones. You couldn't feed anymore. And then TDU, 50 degrees. The organizers placed like 3 bottle points because they've done it every 50 Ks, and you know half of the bottle points on a downhill safe, and a bit on an uphill. Every single soigneur goes to like a 20-meter area. It's carnage. And they did in spring, you didn't hear about it so much because it's colder. Now it's a bigger issue. The Dauphiné, before the pre-final, they had like 4 bottle points. Half of them, one of them was on a 70 kph downhill. Before the pre-final, every single domestique got the call, come get bidons from the car. 20 cars tried to go up to the front at the same point. It was carnage and so dangerous, not just because riders are now having to do a 4-hour stage in 35-degree heat with 4 bidons or 4 bottle points.
Yeah.
So Tour de France, that's going to be a big issue. And yeah, like, again, we reiterate, Benji, rider behavior towards one another with consistent refereeing, safer
Like Riesebeek.
Like Riesebeek, safer parkour design, and
like Copenhagen Sprint.
Yeah, on that one, the Weber's lost me a little bit because I'm like, it is a circuit which you've ridden 6 times and 20 times yesterday. Like, it's a circuit, you know. But anyway, still, safer parkour design.
There's numerous examples.
Yeah, we can find better examples.
2 speed bumps in the final 200 meters of an Andalusia stage, for example, when it's literally against the guidelines of the UCI, but they don't enforce it. That's an example.
Yeah, that's a better one. Okay. You know what? I got a hot take. I like a hairpin in a sprint in the last K.
You and Govenu can go design a sprint stage at the Tour de France together.
I think it decreases the speed, and it decreases the speed.
I think we should put a U-turn in the last 70 meters of a sprint stage.
No, look, a hairpin is different to a fast bend.
Yeah.
A bend does not decrease the speed; it increases the problems of likelihood of crashing or deviations in the last. But a hairpin.
Where? What distance?
Around 800 meters, 1K to go.
I'm okay with between, let's say, 1 kilometer to 1.5K.
Yeah.
I think that's viable. 800 is maybe a bit,
close,
people could be going hardcore into their sprint train at that point. I like the positioning vibe, stretching out the peloton that a U-turn at 1 to 1.5 can give.
Yeah.
But if it's the last 500 meters, I'm like, nope.
Sorry, Kevin Durant just got... I won't spoil it. We're not a basketball podcast.
Is that a basketball player?
I just seeing stuff about Kevin Durant. Yeah. I don't even like basketball anymore. Speaking of maybe trades or strange contracts or strange shenanigans behind the scenes, the UCI, it was announced in a press release, and we've been a bit critical of the UCI this podcast, but I think they've got this completely right. They've opened an investigation into Dries de Bondt and Kevin Vanmarcke.
Ken.
Kevin Vanmarcke is the American rider on Picnic. Ken Vanmarcke. Sorry, let me make that very, very clear. Dries de Bondt and Ken Vanmarcke have been proceedings have been instigated by the UCI Ethics Commission, or it's been referred to the UCI Ethics Commission. This relates to during stage 20 of the Giro d'Italia, we saw on our television Dries de Bondt drop from the breakaway, waiting on Colle delle Finestre.
Yeah.
And he looks around, I would say 6 to 7 times. Looks as he sees Carapaz coming. He then pulls for Carapaz for 3 minutes, full in the wheel, bringing him back to Simon Yates. It actually was a strong pull. It was a bit strange watching it in real time, just because he was so clearly looking for Carapaz. That being said, Jacopo Mosca also pulled for Simon Yates, and it was on a flatter section, and I think it also helped. And it was just random. We've seen this before with guys just at the end of a Grand Tour just throwing their hat in the mix. The strange thing is later, Dries de Bondt gives an interview, I think to Sportza.
I don't know which one it was. I'll be honest about that.
I think it was...
He does give an interview.
Belgian press.
Okay. He brings that out, and in that specific interview, he says that he had a conversation with Ken Vanmarcke, which is the sports director of Carapaz and EF at that race, the morning of the Colle del Finestre stage. So they had a conversation there, and the Bondt in that interview refers to the fact that EF that Ken Vanmarcke basically told him EF might not be able to get a rider in the breakaway to become a satellite rider for Carapaz, and which that already is just
That's the funniest part.
that's also wrong.
Bro's bad at his job and did this.
That's just rude. But that being said, the next part is where they lose me. Because Ken, according to Dries de Bondt, said, and I quote, translated from Dutch, but I'm Flemish, so I can translate. If you're in the breakaway and you can play a role somewhere that is important in the final result of the Giro, then there could be something serious attached to that. The context here is that Dries de Bondt is out of contract next year, and the whole article and sports thing as well refers to the contract situation too. This is 100%, in my opinion, and most people that read that, Ken Vanmarcke saying to Dries de Bondt, we won't be able to get in the breakaway, buddy, but if you can get in the breakaway and help us out on Colle del Finestre, then I'm dropping a real hint here that I might be able to help you contract-wise for next season. That is what I'm reading into this, and I don't think you can read it any other way, to be honest. So this is where the problem is. Because, like you said, it's happened so many times in the sport of cycling, even the last couple of years. There was Vervaeke, for example, in stage 20 of the Giro d'Italia a couple of years ago, did a certain pull in the breakaway as well, and then later, the next year, I'm pretty sure had a contract at that team. Maybe, was it Sunweb that was related to that? I could be wrong in this specific situation. The difference is, Vervaeke didn't come out and actually admit to that being the fact, so because of that, the UCI has no way to prove that there was some kind of agreement before that stage. It could also have been that Vervaeke was literally just saying in the stage, I'll show myself, I'll try to ride here, just in case I can show myself to other teams. That's also possible. But I'm looking at this specific situation now, and we've got the Bondt coming out saying that Vanmarcke came to him and hinted at a potential contract if he helps Carapaz on Colle del Finestre. That's the interpretation. And that is, according to the UCI rules, not allowed. That is not allowed. And there's an actual admission in this case, which, Patrick, question. If the Bondt does not come out here, and if the Bondt does that in a race and doesn't talk about it in the media, would we care?
Well, no, nothing would have happened because there's no evidence of any wrongdoing or collusion behind the scenes. I mean, a rider once repaid Contador by pulling full gas with him to help him win the Fuente Day stage, I think.
Yep.
I remember in the Vuelta 2021, Nick Schultz pulling in the valley for ex-teammate Jack Haig for a little bit just because they're Australian friends. But that's just because they're Australian. Geraint Thomas pulled for Mark Cavendish the last stage of the Giro to help him win the sprint because they're ex-teammates and friends.
This is different.
That's completely... If you pull because you like a guy on another team with no expectation of a financial reward, that is completely different to this. According to the article, basically, de Bondt's out of contract. He did the rounds of the buses earlier in the race and said to Vanmarcke, I'm out of contract earlier in the race. Yep. The morning of Finestre, Vanmarcke went to him. Yep. Went to him and said, what are you doing today? Like, I think in professional sport, you just can't... Well, I mean, if it happens, it happens, but...
But I also don't see the Bondt as the big perpetrator here. I am much more entitled to see Ken Vanmarcke and EF as the wrongdoing party here. Because yes, if you're Dries de Bondt, I'm sorry, but you're out of contract next season. If I can do a small pull after being in the breakaway, let's be honest, he was going in the breakaway to get those Inter-Giro points anyway. So he has the motive to go in the breakaway. He drops from the breakaway. Whether he does a pull for Carapaz or not, it's not going to inflict his race impact, his race at all from that point onwards. So doing that pull benefits him for next season, and it's his career on the line. So I'm perfectly fine with his decision to do that. I do not like that a different team, a DS from a different team, goes to a rider and says, if you do this for us, then there might be a contract in it for you next year. That doesn't sit right. That's the collusion problem.
It's collusion. And I think the UCI, I mean, the Bondt said what happened publicly. It's going to be pretty hard to backtrack. He outlined pretty much exactly what happened.
Yes.
Now, maybe Vanmarcke is able to say, no, it wasn't like that. I just was chatting to him about what you're up to. There was no offer of a contract for next year. But Benji, why didn't, okay, it's going to be hard for Visma to get in the break. Why didn't they go to the Bardiani bus that morning and say, any of you lads get in the break, there's going to be a reward for you if you pull for Yates after Finestra, because UAE won't let Van Aert in the break. That's obviously outrageous and should...
That's the slippery slope.
Yeah.
Because...
But how is that different to this?
If you don't set an example in this case, where it's one rider that is out of contract, that is offered something in return for doing a pull for Carapaz, then the next step is, it being a slippery slope, team-wide collusions across the sport. And that is why that rule exists, and that's why you just can't ignore a situation like this happening. I hope that it doesn't majorly affect the Bondt. I do see some punishment necessary for Ken Vanmarcke in this situation, if I'm honest.
I mean, the Bondt probably should get punished for being so stupid. I mean, the fact that he said this publicly, I mean...
Yeah. Not very smart.
Not very smart. Also,
He'll regret
because
it by now.
Now EF literally, even if the UCI didn't introduce this, didn't instigate these proceedings, which, by the way, the UCI Ethics Commission is separate from the UCI. They just decided themselves to see if there's a breach of the code of ethics. Even if this wasn't instigated, after he said the comments publicly, even if they wanted to, EF could not have given him a contract anymore.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think he's failed a bit of an intelligence test there, and now he's going to have to haul his ass in front of the UCI Ethics Commission for it. So, yeah, in the end, Benji, we'll see what do you think happens?
I think there needs to be some kind of penalty for Ken Vanmarcke in this situation.
I think so. I think the fact that he went to De Bondt makes it a little bit, in the morning. So it makes it a bit uneasy, isn't it?
It's a slippery slope. If you allow this to happen, not do anything about it, the next step is some rider or some DS goes to another team and asks, okay, can the Polty boys ride for us tomorrow?
Yeah, exactly. Like, then what? The richest team.
Then we'll sign one of your riders next year and give you. That's not really a good thing necessarily for that.
Or just paying them for the.
Yeah.
Like, you can't have it. That's why there's trade teams. And what? How are UAE to know? How are UAE to know that EF had an extra rider potentially up the road wearing on another
unfair
team?
Advantage.
Yeah, so we'll see what comes out of that.
Then I saw a Willard Flitz article the other day where they spun it accordingly of like, is the reaction by the UCI to Dries de Bondt and Ken Vanmarcke, is that a sign that the UCI wants to put the Omerta back in the peloton by forcing them to shut up in the media about stuff like this? I'm sorry, but Omerta is a completely different fucking storyline, buddy. For the people that don't know, Omerta was back in the day basically the rule that doping related shit, shut up about it publicly. We gotta hide it from everyone. That's the vibe, right? What does that have anything to do with this?
Yeah, I think they've probably got the wrong end of the stick there. First of all,
one of the dumbest articles I've read in a long time.
It's the own guy confessing himself that he did it. And then secondly, I would just say don't do things that are against the rules. That's a good start.
I'm saying that, but there are some UCI rules that I don't agree with. Like the fact that for me, it should be allowed for males to leave Tour de Suisse without asking an exemption and then going to Copenhagen Sprint.
You know what's a good rule? You know what's a really good rule as well this year?
What?
You don't have to do Copenhagen Sprint. You don't have to do Eschborn Frankfurt. You don't have to do these Cadel Evans, the newer races on the program. If you're a world team, you can elect not to do them. No financial penalty. If you do them and you start with less than 7 riders, you get fined.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
Less than 7? I thought it was a limit of minimum 6. Could be wrong.
No, 7.
Really? Whew.
So if you don't want to get fined, even if you want to start with Eschborn Frankfurt, you can start with 5.
Yeah.
Like, it'd be no problem. You can start with 5 and still have a leader. But if you're going to get fined, just don't start. It's so stupid.
Also, a bit off topic, but did you see the drama? We spoke about the Manier versus Philipsen sprint in that Belgian ChatGPT race. Did you see the photo finish drama? I had Amstel Gold Race flashbacks. As in, on the photo finish, it's clear that Manier won, but there's this picture from next to the finish that, if you look at the picture, you'd say Philipsen won that. And then a picture from the other side shows Manier winning the race from that angle. But on that one, you can't tell whether Philipsen's front wheel is off the floor. Mate, the whole UCI photo finish rule set is also a bit ridiculous to me.
I don't know. The photo, I think Manier won pretty easily. I think this is just Belgian tears. I do. Look at the photo finish.
That's what I'm talking about. The photo finish is not the actual finish. That's the problem in this sport. Why does nobody care about the fact that the photo finish is not taken on the fucking finish line? It is taken before the finish line. So the rider 2 can pass rider 1 between the photo finish and the actual finish. What sport is it? I'm sorry, this is so fucking stupid. You know why?
Sorry.
You know why?
France knew.
Because the photo finish, the actual finish line on the road is a black line. And we have to take the photo finish on the white portion before it because tires are black and we can't see black tires on a black finish line. Make the finish line a different color.
Yeah, so shouldn't it then be a wider black strip within a white strip where the photo is, where the finish line is?
Yep.
Yeah, well, I think Belgium got a few photo finishes they shouldn't have in the last couple of years.
That is true.
Lawrence Rex, Van Aert. So I think France deserves this one. And yeah, it looked like Manier.
Who was the other one?
Morgado lost to Rex. And Ewan against Tyson.
Yes.
that was ridiculous. Okay. Long episode today, a lot to catch up on. We won't have any podcasts this week. National Championships coming up. There's nothing really to preview. If you contact Benji via telephone, he will give you a personal Giro dell'Apennino preview. But otherwise, thanks for listening. As always, go and check out the Morton offer down below, and we'll see you with another weekly or the Tour de France preview next. Ciao, ciao, ciao.